The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good evening, everybody, and a big welcome to our third webinar in our series of 4. And tonight, this webinar is all about influence, impact, and personal power. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Debbie Walmsley.
And my name's Sue Quigley. Like quite a few people, Debbie and I have unfortunately had the coughs and colds, so we're hoping to get through tonight without too much coughing and spluttering all over the microphone. So we're packed out with our bottles of water and our throat lozenges, and we're raring to go.
Before we start, just like to say, just to make sure you can all hear us and see our slides, if you could just, someone could just type a yes in the chat box, that will be useful. And actually, while somebody's doing that, if it would be really useful if you could have to hand a pen and paper today, because you might want to be taking a few notes. Well, actually, not might about, you probably will be taking a few notes.
So I thought we'd start off tonight with a recap of our last 2 webinars, seeing as they actually did take place last year. Now, we had an intention when we started this series of webinars, and we called them Be Your Best You. And the reason for that is because we've certainly realised that as women, we don't always turn up as the very best version of ourselves. When I say when we turn up, what does that actually mean? That means we don't turn up in the role that we have, whether that's as a partner, a wife, a sister, a mother, as in our role at work. So we've designed our webinars to show you how just some simple small changes can have big impacts on how things turn out. Actually, it's relatively easy. It's certainly achievable. All it takes is a change of mindset and an intention. Now, our first webinar, we talked about the importance of values, having healthy boundaries, and how to take and give a compliment. And our last webinar, it was all about rapport, how you can have amazing charisma and ask really powerful questions to get you knowing exactly where you stand. So tonight we're going to cover a few of those topics again, and as Debbie said, we're talking about influence, impact and personal power.
I'd really like to start off this evening by just explaining a little bit, giving you a bit of background about me and about an incident that happened when I was in my corporate role. I was working as a company secretary, and I was tasked with some of the processes we used. Won't go into what they were or whatever, not relevant, but I was tasked with simplifying a process for the executive directors. And I went away and I researched this, and I did what I was asked, and I reported back at a meeting. There's quite a few people at this meeting. And I remember speaking very confidently in this meeting, saying how we could simplify, how we could make everything much easier, how we could streamline it and make it much more online, take away all the paper. And I had evidence to back up that all the processes would work. But in that meeting, I didn't have rapport with my boss, although I didn't realise it at the time. And at one point, my boss actually turned around and absolutely verbally laid into me. And I was left feeling absolutely dreadful. I just shrunk. I didn't want to talk to anybody. I lost all my confidence. I didn't understand then about rapport. I didn't understand about influence, impact or personal power. I just became very much the victim of my boss's verbal abuse, if you like, and I didn't know how to stop it, how to get out of it, how to recover from it. And that had a huge negative impact on my career from that moment on.
You know, my story, I've got a story about the corporate job that I used to have, but I think mine's more about values. I don't know. I'll tell you, see what you think. I left my corporate job last year at the end of May, and I'd actually been there with continued service over 24 years. And certainly in the last 12 years of my job, I'd had the luxury of having a company car as part of the salary package. And, you know, I had a real thing about cars. They all either had to be black or silver,
Only black or silver?
only black or silver, and whichever model I had, it always had to be top of the range. I needed to have leather seats, I needed to have Bluetooth, and you know, when I say I needed to have, I genuinely thought I need to have these things.
Yeah.
So, and that's how it always was. So when I actually gave up my job, obviously one of the things that was going was the company car, and I found myself in a really different position because I'd given up my, you know, my very healthy salary, and I was going to set up my own business where, you know, I couldn't determine what my income was actually going to be, starting out brand new self-employed. So I had to go and buy a new second-hand car. And when, new second-hand car? No such thing. I had to go and buy a second-hand car. And of course I went with the same old criteria. It had to be black or silver, and I was looking at nice sports cars, I was looking at little convertibles. And then I realised that actually I suddenly didn't know why I was sticking to that criteria. And it was really weird because as soon as I recognised I was looking for something I no longer wanted, I had a real sense of freedom. And so I spent days looking on the internet, looking at all these cars, and then one day this bright yellow Mini pops up for sale. A completely different car to what I'd had before. And it was over 12 years old. But you know, when I looked at this Mini, I just got a great big smile on my face, and I went, that's my car. That's the car I want to buy. And between seeing it on the internet and going out and buying it, I think it was only about 2 hours. And I realised then that actually my values had completely changed.
Yeah.
I no longer needed the top of the range black and silver car, and I realised actually that all that was doing was compensating me for being in a job I didn't really want to do but was paying me well, and I kind of felt I deserved it. By letting go of all that, I realised I was just buying a car for me. And you know what? It's probably the best car I've had in terms of how much pleasure it gives me. You know, it doesn't even have a CD player in there, but it's just brilliant. It does the job just for me, and I actually think it's a real reflection of me, and I just love it.
Did you find that empowering?
I did. I tell you what, I found so much freedom as well in getting something that actually I really wanted rather than a payoff.
Yeah.
That made a big difference to me.
Yeah, I can really relate to some of that, Sue. So let's think about what we want to do tonight. We want to talk about impact, influence, and personal power. Let's pick on one of those. Let's talk about influence. When you hear that word, what does that mean to you? Well, let me give you the dictionary definition to start with. In the dictionary, influence is the capacity to have an effect on the character, development, or behaviour of someone or something. What we're going to be discussing tonight is how you can be influential in a positive way by thinking about how you interact with people and the effect that you have on those around you. What I'd like you to do right now, wherever you are, just imagine how it would be if you could walk into a room and have people want to get to know you. If you could introduce yourself and have people remember you. And have it so that when you met someone, they would want to do business with you. Tonight we're going to give you some tips and techniques to create influence. And one of those, one that's going to make a big impact, is rapport. You see, rapport creates trust. It helps us to achieve our goals, and that could be anything from going into a shop and asking for a discount or getting the job that we want. I wonder if you've ever found yourself in a situation when you've walked into a room and you find yourself instantly drawn to one group of people rather than another. And that's because we like people who are similar to us. Now this can be something conscious. You may go over to someone who's wearing a piece of clothing that's similar to yours, maybe from the same designer or from the same shop, or maybe they're carrying a book, from your favourite author. That's similarity helps us to break the ice and starts to build rapport. It can also be unconscious. You may find yourself drawn to a group of people, or maybe an individual, without knowing why. And this is simply due to maybe how they stand, or how they speak, or even how they dress. You see, when we're in rapport, the conversation flows and it just feels easy and effortless. So, how do we create rapport? Now, we've touched on this before on one of our webinars. I'd like to go over that once more. We like people who seem familiar to us and who appear as we do. And one way to increase that rapport is to match or mirror the other person's behaviours. Now, mirroring is simply physically copying the behaviour of another person as if reflecting their movements back to them. Now, we can match or mirror voice and posture, blinking, facial expressions, words, gesturing, physiology, even breathing. Let me give you an example. If I tilt my head to the left, you could mirror me and tilt your head to the right, just like the mirror. You can align your posture similar to how somebody else stands or sits. Are they upright or do they slouch a bit? When you sit across from someone, you can assume a mirror position of the hands or the legs, their head. And when a person talks, you can observe the gestures that they make with their hands. And you can use the same gestures when responding back. However, I do have a word of caution. Please do not try and imitate every gesture every time. That really is going to come across as just a bit weird. When a person is talking, simply notice the gestures that they make and use them back to them when you're responding to them. And ensure this is done with respect and with subtlety. What will happen when you do this at an unconscious level? The person with whom you're communicating in this way feels acknowledged and appreciates your interest in them. You're simply pacing that person's experience, and although they may be unaware of your mirroring, it will have a profound effect on them. The great thing is you can even do this on the phone. You can still build rapport. Just listen to a person's language and match their voice, speed and tone. Listen to the person, the words the person uses. Do they use visual words? Do they say things like, "Oh yeah, I see what you mean," or "Gosh, that looks great. Bright idea, that's a really bright idea." Or do they use auditory words like, "I hear what you're saying, I can tell you're really angry," or "That sounds brilliant." Or maybe they use kinesthetic words. Right, I've got a real grasp of this subject now. Do you know, that just doesn't feel right for me. Or that's really hard for me to understand. Here's something for you to do. Try matching and mirroring just one aspect of another person's behaviour while you're talking to them. Perhaps it's their posture. And when this becomes easy, gently include another piece, maybe their hand gestures, and gradually add another and another until you are matching or mirroring without even thinking about it. The more you practice, the easier it will become. And you know what? You're also going to be rewarded with the same comfortable, positive response in yourself that you're creating for another person. And here's another little tip. Mismatching. That's a really useful skill to master. I don't know about you, Sue, but have you ever been at a party and you've been cornered by someone who is just going on and on and on and on when you're having a conversation with them?
Oh gosh, I think I'm probably that person actually. I quite like the sound of my own voice sometimes.
I'm sure that's not true. But have you ever wondered if and when they're ever going to stop talking? Now here's the thing, you can break eye contact. You could turn your body slightly at an angle. You could breathe faster or slower in contrast to their breathing. In short, do anything to break rapport by mismatching their body language, their breathing, anything. You're going to be surprised how quickly and easily that conversation will draw to a close. Something else I'd like to talk about is the power of a smile. Now, if you find yourself, I'm sure you've had this situation, if you've entered in a room and there's two people in that room, and you had to choose which person to talk to. Now they both look the same, they've got a similar posture, so you've got the rapport. The only difference is one person was smiling. You've got to ask yourself, who would you prefer to talk to? Everyone, and I mean everyone, is attracted more to someone who smiles. A smile shows warmth, shows confidence, happiness and acceptance. We all know first impressions count, and if you walk into a room confidently with a big wide smile, you will instantly be liked. Something else that really does help to build up influence is to be very clear in your communications. One of the biggest mistakes people make in trying to be influential is that they start talking about a topic or a situation that the other person is either not yet aware of or is unfamiliar with. Do you know, I've got a friend, and this just drives me mad. I've got a friend who, whenever you bump into her, she just starts a story right in the middle of it. You know, or it's something talking about a subject, and she talks as if you know what she's talking about. And I'm just clueless. It's really important to just start your discussions on a point that people can relate to, preferably from the very beginning, unless you're really sure they already know the foundation of whatever it is that you want to discuss. And something else to be careful of is your choice of words. For example, if you say to somebody, "Oh God, he's absolutely mad," just think about it. What do you really mean? Do you mean he's angry, or do you mean he's crazy? To avoid miscommunication, be very clear on the choice of words that you use and ensure they say exactly what you really mean. And something else is pay attention to what is being said. Listen, and I mean really, really listen. Listen to understand exactly what that person is really saying. All too often, when we listen to reply. We start to formulate answers, or we're thinking of what we want to say before the other person's even finished. And consequently, we do not listen. I'm sure you've all heard this saying, we've got 2 ears and 1 mouth, and we should use them in that ratio. We should listen twice as much as we talk. If you start a conversation by asking a question, as that other person talks, just keep listening. Nod throughout that conversation. This will increase your rapport, especially if you start to match your body language. And by listening, instead of interrupting with your own thoughts, it shows the other person the conversation is about them and not you. It is really useful to practice and enhance your influence skills until they become part of you. When listening, don't interrupt while they're talking. Just wait a second or two before you speak, and avoid changing subjects because this indicates your disinterest.
Thanks, Debbie. I found that quite interesting listening back to that, because some of the things you spoke about, I always thought, well, they seem far too simplistic, especially the thing about the power of a smile.
Yeah.
Well, of course you smile when you walk into a room.
Sometimes
And then I thought, well, actually, do I?
Yeah.
Or am I so much in my head thinking about who I might want to see, what I might want to say, that I'm actually not paying attention to what my face is actually doing. So
Yeah.
definitely going to become more aware of that.
Some of the most simple things have the most profound effect.
Yeah. A lot of it is common sense, but we just don't think about it at the time, do
it's
we?
very true.
You know, interestingly enough then, just on the back of that, whatever we do, we are always making an impact.
Mm-hmm.
Other people observe us, listen to us and make judgments, and you know, we do the same with them. Personal impact is vital in all areas of our life, whether that's personal or business. And the way we come across to others not only affects how successful we are, or what type of relationships we build, but also, and in my book most importantly, it determines how we feel about ourselves and how we feel about our surroundings. So the first important question I think you might want to ask yourself is, am I making the impact that I'd actually like to make? Now, impact is linked to the ability for us to make change happen, to influence others, and it's also related to self-esteem and confidence. The more comfortable we feel in our own skin, the more natural and charismatic we become, and our impact actually increases. And developing our own personal impact will have far-reaching consequences. It really is the foundation of personal success, whether that's at work, at home, and in our social lives as well. And the good news is it's something that can be developed. It's actually a skill, it's not a talent. And at its heart, it's really all about connecting with people, establishing rapport, just as Debbie has been talking about, and building trust. And again, something Debbie spoke about, if you're with someone, eye contact is really, really crucial. You're too little and you might come across as a bit shifty. But as with influence, matching the other person and paying attention to their body language and your body language, and that's really key. You know, on our last webinar, we spoke about the importance of non-verbal communication, and we put a slide up with those amazing statistics again. You know, incredibly body language and voice tonality amounts to 93% of how we communicate. Just 7% actually relates to what we're saying. So it's actually true. It's not what you say, it's the way that you say it. Now, there are some little things that we could do that could actually ruin the impact that we're making as well. And that's not having eye contact, fidgeting, looking distractedly around the room. Have you ever been talking to somebody and they're sort of looking over your shoulder? You think, are you interested in me? Or are you looking to see who else is coming in the room? Or babbling on so rapidly that people have no time to think about what's being said or even ask you any questions. And then my favourite, shuffling feet. That really does give a lack of interest, doesn't it?
Really annoying.
And it actually looks like, because your feet are moving, it's actually like as if you're unconsciously wanting to move away from that person. You know, there's a well-known saying that people buy people first and then they buy their products or services. And you know, that's largely true. And you don't have to be in selling to buy into that. People want to buy you. And if people don't like the messenger, then often they're going to reject the message. You know, I've certainly had the experience of going into a shop to buy something that was in stock, only to walk out without buying it because of the style of the salesperson there. How we come across has a huge bearing on whether or not our ideas will be given a fair chance. And you know, I know you spoke that personal story you gave, Debbie. That was obviously, you know, awful for you.
Yeah.
But obviously it was how you were coming across in some way.
Oh,
as hurtful
absolutely.
as that might be to face, you kind of have to think, how did I put that across?
By not having that rapport with people.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
Well, certainly our
yeah.
verbal and non-verbal style has a huge impact on how people evaluate us, if you like, how they make their mind up about us. And while we can get away with perhaps one or two distracting habits or mannerisms, as I've just spoken about, the fidgeting and the shuffling feet, any more than that, and I think we're actually jeopardising the connection that we can have with people.
Absolutely. So, I mean, that leads us really nicely into impact. Wouldn't it be great if we knew the impact that we were having on others? I know now, I wish I knew then, what I know now. You see, every one of us has an impact on other people. The way the impact is experienced can vary enormously. Have you ever heard someone say, when he spoke, it was like being hit in the face with a wet kipper? Or something like, she could talk the glass eye to death. What What might that tell us? Well, in all probability, that the experience was a very unpleasant one, and one the recipient would hardly want to repeat. What about from your point of view? Can you think of an occasion now when you've had to make a really positive impression? What have you done? How did you go about that? How successful was it? What got in the way of that being even more successful? You know, no doubt you are beginning to appreciate that your component in an interaction is a significant part. Maybe even as much as the listeners. One way to think of the topic is to think how might we measure impact. If we started by saying the impact of our communication is only as good as the reaction in the listener, then perhaps we're on our way to understanding a little more. It's the opposite of that quite common, well, I've told them, what more can I do, approach, and suggests that if we want to move hearts and minds, then we need to do a lot more than just talk at people. Many of us will have had the experience of receiving less desirable outcomes than we would have liked in our communication with other people. Some people say, well, that's the listener's fault. Others, with maybe a little bit more insight, might say, no, that's the speaker's fault. I'd like to suggest a slightly different approach. It's actually nobody's fault. Now you might be thinking, well, how can that be? But look at it this way. If we desire to have a greater personal impact and effectiveness, we must first of all be totally responsible. For everything that we do and for everything that we don't do, responsibility equals impact. Impact, responsibility and power generate each other. So take responsibility for everything that you do. So why is it so important? Quite simply, because when we don't take full responsibility, all we do is start complaining and blaming, and that just leaves us feeling powerless. So what I'd like you to do now is grab that pen and paper, because I've got some action points for you. I'm going to give you some ways in which you can start doing a self-assessment of how you come across to others. You just take these topics one at a time and see how you can improve your impact. First one is eye contact. When speaking with people, ensure that you have eye contact. Around 3 or 4 seconds per person is usually about right. And incidentally, this type of eye contact is one of the best ways of increasing your own confidence. Pace. The pace of how you speak. Slow down a little. Sue's mentioned, nervous people babble rapidly, often because they want to get everything over and done with as quickly as possible, or because they're afraid that if they paused to take a breath, somebody might jump in and ask an awkward question. But slow down. Next one's pauses. These are really closely related to the previous one on pace. But if you listen to competent people use pauses for impact and to enable listeners to process what they're saying. So remember to pause. You know, working on the above list will go a long, long way to increasing your impact. And it can be really useful to ask a friend to help you in this process. Very few of us are aware of our own vocal and physical mannerisms. So ask a friend, a good friend, someone you trust, to give you some feedback. Ask them how they perceive you. You might be surprised by what you hear. It's important to know in this instance that we're not asking about failure. We're not asking about what you do wrong. We are literally talking about feedback. And there's a difference. Feedback will give you an insight into the type of impact that you're currently having or currently don't have. And it's going to give you an insight to what you can improve. Without feedback, no one can improve.
So now we know about impact and the ways that we can positively influence. And now I'm going to talk to you about personal power. What is personal power and how do we get it? I guess we can start by defining personal power as the ability to change the direction of something, so we could change the direction our lives are going. The personal power is our ability to choose our responses. You know, certainly me in the past, but many people can think they're not responsible for how they feel. They think that circumstances or other people make them feel a certain way. The personal power is about taking back control of your emotions, being in charge of managing your thoughts and emotions rather than having them dictated to you by outside conditions. And why is that important? Because taking control of your emotions and making yourself responsible for how you feel gives you choice. It gives you empowerment. And these choices help you build stronger relationships, they help you learn more, you'll end up taking more risks, you'll certainly bounce back from failure a lot faster. You'll create more opportunities and get more done. And all of that turns up the volume on your own personal power. Wouldn't it be great to start to feel in control, to feel empowered, and know that you can choose how to respond in situations? Imagine how you'll feel when you've got increased personal power. Well, you know what? You can do this because I have developed your very own 5-step plan to increase that, and I'm going to talk about that in a short while. But I'm going to start with this. We were all born with personal power. It's just that some people have given it away. And by this, I mean that they believe their feelings are controlled by outside influences, whether that's their environment, a certain situation, or even other people. And there are some people that have actually hung on to their personal power and used it to the max. And they understand that their lives are their own, and they choose to take responsibility and do something about their lives. So let me ask you, who controls your emotions? Who dictates the terms of your existence? And who do you think is responsible for your happiness? You can start right now to increase your personal power. As I said, I've developed a 5-step plan that will enable you to do this. So go grab those pens and papers, and I'm just going to run through them now. And the first one is to know what you stand for. And this is about knowing what's important to you and what you value most. Now, by knowing our values and what we value gives us focus, it gives us meaning to what we do. If you like, it's almost like some kind of emotional guide. And you know, what we stand for and represent and not being afraid of gives you amazing personal power. Now, if you don't know what your values are, that's okay. I certainly didn't. I didn't even know that it was something that you could do up until recently. But it's really honestly worth taking the time to identify what these are. And you can have values for all different areas of your life. You can have it for your career, you can have values for your health and fitness, have values about your relationships. You know, you can have values for how you bring up your children. And identifying values gives you a greater sense of purpose and clarity. And the second step is believe in what you're doing. So for the sake of an example here, I'm going to do this in the context of your work. Because this one also was quite personal to me when I was talking about the role that I was in. Are you working because it's something you really want to do? Because you love it? Because it means something to you and gives you something back? Or are you just doing the job because you have to? Because it pays the bills? Or because that's what you think you should be doing? You see, many of us end up compromising our most deeply held values at work because that's what we think we need to do in order to get on or just get ahead. And whether ahead means getting more money, more status, more pleasure, you know, or some other kind of lure. When we end up of doing things we don't really believe in or enjoy doing, it saps our personal power, and we slowly become dead people working. And let me ask you, do you really believe in what you're doing at work? And are you working on things that will matter 5 years from now? And I invite you to start right now and decide, how are you going to engage in work that really matters to you? And before you start to think, oh, that would never work, how would I ever make ends meet? Instead, start from a more positive perspective. Ask yourself instead, how do I make this happen? And then see what thoughts you get. Honestly, this is really worth doing. You see, when you find what you're good at, what you're passionate about, you'll tap into the joy and enthusiasm that automatically and naturally increases your personal power. If you're stuck in a job because it's easy or safe or it pays well, it gives you no sense of purpose and passion. And that's you being then in the most difficult job of all, a job that constantly drains your personal power. Now, if you really don't know where to start with this, then let's ask yourself these questions. So thinking about finding your talents, ask yourself, what am I good at? What do I get good feedback on? What comes naturally to me? And what knowledge, skills, or even solutions do people seek me out for? You know, when people need something, what do they come to me for? And then when you're thinking about finding your passion, ask yourself, when am I most alive at work? What brings vitality to my life at work? What I'm actually doing at work when time seems to fly by? And who am I with when I'm most energized and engaged? Be honest with your answers, and don't be shy either. This is a time for you to really get, real about what you're good at. So number 3, be yourself. Be your good and wonderful self, and don't be afraid to shine. You know, it really takes guts to be yourself, to live your values out loud. Because your values and those beliefs you hold are what make you you. You've heard people talk about being authentic. Being authentic is all about putting it all out there and being vulnerable. There's always the possibility that you and your ideas will be rejected, but if you think about it, being rejected for being you pales far in comparison to feeling like a fraud. Nothing will drain your personal power quicker than being somebody you're not, to feel that you're living a lie. You're uniquely different from every other person in the world. And when you honour and leverage your uniqueness by living your values out loud, you'll in turn strengthen your personal power. So have a think about what being real at work looks like for you. And start acting like you. Enjoy that surge in personal power. Number 4 is a bit of a favourite of mine. Refuse to let people push your buttons. And that's because this is where you really get to exercise control. Whether this is in a work situation, whether it's somebody that you work with or even your boss, even a customer, it can be at home with your partner, your kids, your friends. People will push your buttons and you're going to be tempted to react automatically. But when you do that, you essentially hand over your personal power to the person that's pushing your buttons. When you actively refuse to become engaged and responsible, people will change their behaviours. See, change begins from the inside out. That is, when you stop going on autopilot, people will stop pushing their buttons. Or rather, when you stop going on autopilot, you change. And when people stop pushing your buttons, they change. And the focus of control is then with you. And the minute you take responsibility for your emotions, your personal power grows. Now this does, I think, take some thought and preparation, as so much of our reactions are down to habit and old patterns of behaviour. So, like any good Boy Scout out there, be prepared. Know who or what pushes your buttons, and then think about how you'd like to be when that situation arises again. Think about not reacting. Imagine how that would be, and think it through a few times so it starts to become familiar to you, and you're prepared then. So the next time it happens, you can bring that thought to mind and choose to be that way. And finally, and I know this can be controversial, choose not to be a victim. You know, let's face it, life is difficult. Bad things happen to good people. And if, you know, I can tell you, if life hasn't dealt you some serious blows already, I'd seriously question whether or not you're in touch with reality. But here's the thing. While life may cause you to be a victim, only you decide whether you're going to become victimised. And people who become victimised live in a world of self-indulgence. Now, I can say this hand on heart from experience. I spent a good chunk of my life thinking everyone and everything was against me. I gave in to so many negative thoughts, and I have to confess, I kind of felt comfortable. Playing the victim actually gave me some advantages. It meant I didn't have to be responsible. It meant that I could actually behave badly. I could sulk and be selfish, and people would let me off the hook because, well, I'd had a bad time and I wasn't feeling so great about myself. And of course, I never realised all of this for quite some time. And I just went along thinking this was how life was. And my friends were actually far too kind to give me the boot up the bum that I actually really needed. And you know, actually that was another benefit. Me being the victim, everybody walked around me on eggshells as they didn't want to upset me, so I was generally left off the hook. You know, we can't stop bad things happening to us, but we can choose how we respond to them. There's a world of difference between being a victim and becoming victimised. Sometimes we can't stop becoming a victim, but we can stop being victimised. So, let's have a think. In fact, let's decide, what are you going to do to avoid moving from victim to victimised the next time something painful or discouraging happens?
Thank you, Sue. That was really interesting. You know, we've covered quite a lot this evening, and I hope you've all got some real value from what we've discussed. And, you know, it might open up a load of questions or whatever, so please feel free to either contact me or Sue if you've got any questions or queries that you want to talk about. But, you know, from this evening, you now know how easy it is to be influential, how you can make an impact, and how you can have that wonderful personal power. It's all down to practice. You can start to be more and more comfortable as you continue to embrace these new patterns of positive behaviour, and you will start to see and feel the changes each and every day. More importantly, it's all about setting that intention right from the start.
You know, we've had some great feedback about the webinars, and thank you to everybody that's responded. And I'm really excited to announce that we're going to be running a series of one-day workshops throughout February and March. And we're going to be doing these in Canterbury, Hertfordshire and London. It's all going to be based on what we've been covering on the webinars, but we're really going to look at bringing it to life. So I'll tell you now, the cost for the whole day's workshop is £97 per person. But we're also going to be releasing some really fantastic early bird offers, so please look out for these. Once we've got the dates and venues confirmed, we'll release these straight out to you. And we'll release them to you first before we actually put them on any other sort of promotional activities. As I said, these workshops are going to build on what we've been discussing on the webinars. We're going to give you practical tips that we can act out on the day. You'll get to practice firsthand, and you'll experience what it really feels like to have enhanced charisma, improved personal power, and increased self-esteem. It's going to be a really great day, and it's going to be loads of fun, and it would be fantastic to see you all there. We really look forward to it. So if you want to express your interest now, you'd like more details about the events, then please contact either Debbie or myself, and we'd gladly respond to you.
You know, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a really lovely evening, and quite, even for me, you know, even though I know some of this stuff, I've still learned an awful lot from this evening. You know, just like to say thank you once again for joining us. It's been great having you along, and I hope that you will be able to join us for our next webinar, the fourth and final one in the series of 4, which is about aspirations, belief and innate wisdom. And that's going to be at 7:30 on Monday the 2nd of February. I really hope you can join us then. Thank you very much and have a fabulous evening.
Yeah, have a great evening, everybody. Thanks again, and we'll see you soon.
Bye.
Bye.